Hi everybody, it's Rhiannon from the Epsom Bakehouse. Thanks very much if you're joining, especially if you're watching this as a replay. It's really great to have you here. Do let me know if you have come along to watch as a replay and where you're from, whether you've baked bread, baked sourdough before, and especially if you've got any kind of specific questions. As I probably said, if you did see a notification, going live today to talk about how to make a sourdough starter, specifically from rye flour, and that's because it's part of Sourdough September, which is celebrated especially by the Real Bread campaign, to encourage people to maybe buy sourdough from a local independent retailer, bakery, or to get baking their own, get to know how to make your own loaf. Just while we wait for a few people to get on board and start watching, I hope everyone's had a good week. I'm still recovering a little bit from an epic baking session I did for Bread Week, because if you watch the Great British Bake Off, it was Bread Week this week, my favourite week, as you might imagine, and there was plenty to celebrate. I celebrated by making a cottage loaf with an overnight poolish. If you follow me on Instagram, at the Epsom Bakehouse on Instagram, you might have seen on my Insta stories I made an overnight poolish, and made that, which is when you mix the flour, water and yeast together, and it brings out some really great flavour, and that's one way of getting some great flavour into your bread. Made a cottage loaf from that, and also made some mini chocolate babkas, which were really tasty. Use them up. So if anyone watched it, I hope you enjoyed it. I thought it was a great episode. One of the things I love the most about it is because they are really quite pressured with the time, and that's something when I'm talking about making bread, we always talk about, you should leave it for as long as possible, like an overnight poolish, get as much flavour into your bread. But it's a competition, and if there wasn't time constraints, then it wouldn't be very competitive, and they could have all the time in the world to produce some really great bread, which I'm sure they would all do. But I think what thing it does show you is what can go wrong when you don't give your bread enough time. So we saw some overproving, we saw bread collapsing, we saw some underproving. Some of those loaves, when they cut them open, looked really dense in the middle because they hadn't had long enough to fill up with gas. That was some of the things. So I'll share a link a little bit later in the comments. I wrote a bit of a blog on what you can learn when you watch Bake Off, and especially when you watch Bread Week, what you can learn. I can see we've got some live viewers. Unfortunately, I can't quite see who you are, which is really unhelpful. Let me just have a look. Well, if you're here, thank you very much. I will try and see if I can find you and say hi. But say hi in the comments if you are watching. So I think that's enough chatting about Bake Off, and I'll get on to what we're going to talk about today. So as I said, talking about making a rye sourdough starter. Now, if you're wondering what on earth I'm talking about, a sourdough starter is the traditional basis of making sourdough bread, and it's actually how you go about getting the gas that raises your bread into your sourdough. And the way that happens is that you make a starter using flour and water, and you mix it together and give it time to ferment for the natural yeast that live on the flour grain to grow, multiply and start producing gas. And then once you've got a stable colony of yeast and bacteria within your sourdough starter, you can then use that starter as part of your dough, and the yeast will continue to multiply and flourish in your bread, producing gas that rises your sourdough. There will also be bacteria present, but good bacteria, we hope. Most importantly, bacteria known as lactic acid bacteria, and they can provide some of the more complex flavours to your sourdough, but they also, when they produce acid, as their name suggests, they can actually help preserve your sourdough bread. So you do want to encourage those two colonies of the yeast and the bacteria that will live together in your sourdough starter. And that's why it can take a bit of time for your sourdough starter to settle down, to get going, to get to a point where it doesn't smell too acidic. It has a nice fruity smell. It's producing enough gas that will actually produce a good loaf of bread, will actually rise a loaf of bread. So that's what a sourdough starter is. The flours you use is, it's a cereal grain generally, so rye, wheat, spelt. But for me, I generally use a rye starter. And there's two reasons that I favour the rye starter. Number one, that you'll get more. Generally, in a rye flour, there's more yeast present on the rye grain when they mill it. It's more natural yeast present, so it's a bit more vigorous, and you'll get a stronger starter generally from a rye starter. That also means you don't need to use as much when you make rye bread, when you make sourdough with it, so you can keep less of it, and that is just good for storage, and also good for when you're trying to use up less flour to feed your starter. You can make less of it, and it will still give you a great loaf of bread. So that's two reasons why I favour rye, and why I'm going to show you how I start my rye starter. Now, generally when you're making a starter, it will take about 5 days to a week, and that is feeding it every day and watching how it develops. So it's not something for those of us who want something right now, but if you're happy to go ahead and try it out, you can do it, and it will just take a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, and a little bit of tending to it every day. Now, I just want to say hello again if you're watching. I'm sorry I can't see exactly who you are, but I will come back and say hello to you. Oh, hi. Oh, I've just seen Claire. Oh, hello. I can see you all now. I've tapped and I can see you all. And I can see Claire there saying how interesting. Was there any particular questions anybody had that you wanted me to answer today? What I will say is that I'm going to come back over the next few days, as I'm going to make this starter now and carry on with it over the next few days. There will be time to ask questions because I'll do a few more videos. And so don't worry if you haven't got any questions now, but if you start and you suddenly think, what, I wanted to ask that, then either come back and add it to the comments in this video when it's done, or come back in a day or two, because I'll be doing more live videos on the page. And if you don't already like the Epsom Bakehouse's Facebook page, then go and like the page once the videos finish, and then you'll get a notification when the next set of videos come up on making this sourdough starter. So we'll get started now. So I'll just show you what I've got here. It's very simple to make this starter. I'll turn around. So I've got some wholemeal rye flour. Generally, when you get rye flour in the supermarket, it is wholemeal. It's the whole grain. You can buy white rye flour. It's you don't see it as often in the supermarkets, but it is available. But what you want for a rye starter is wholemeal, the whole grain. And I'm using one from Dove's, but there are plenty of them available. What I will say, though, is obviously with the organic farming that there'll be less, potentially, chemicals there that might have killed off some of the natural yeast on the flour. So that's what I'm using. And I've already weighed out, sorry about the glare, I've already weighed out 25 grams, which is all you need at the start. Now remember, you're going to feed it every day. So I've got a relatively big bowl because I'm going to add stuff into it. And so I want to be able to do that and be able to grow and leave space. So don't start with a tiny little bowl thinking you'll still add to it. You'll end up decanting into a bigger bowl. And the last ingredient is water, which I have some here. So all I'm going to do at the start is add in, so I had 25 grams of the rye flour, and I'm going to add in 50 grams. Let's have a look. Oh, always stuck on 49. There we go. 50 grams of water. So it's not a 1-to-1, it's a 2-to-1 ratio, so it's going to be quite liquid. And just give it a stir. give it a stir until there's no dry flour left. Now you will see some bubbles there, but don't worry, it's not the magic effect of yeast just taking apart. It's just the bubbles from the effect of me pouring the water in. All right, all stirred up. And now one last piece of essential bread making equipment, a shower cap. Who'd have thought it? So I will put that over when I've got another hand free. And I will put that over the top. And that is all I'm going to do today. Sorry it's not exceptionally exciting, but mixing some flour and water together is the start of making your sourdough starter. And I'm going to keep that out on the side, so I'm not going to put it anywhere particularly warm, mainly because the yeast will start to grow, but bacteria is likely to grow much more quickly, and you don't want the bacteria to take hold before the yeast have a chance to get going in terms of multiplying and growing within the mixture. So I'm going to leave that on the side. It's fairly cool now. My car said 7.5 degrees this morning, so the nights are starting to get a little bit cooler now. We're going more into September, so it shouldn't be too warm in this kitchen, and I can just leave it out on the side. If you perhaps have got the heating on already, or you've got another heat source, or maybe your kitchen, obviously when you've got the oven on in the evening it gets really warm, then maybe just put it somewhere a little bit cooler. Yes, when it's cooler, it will take time to get going, but you should be able to find that your yeast will start to proliferate. They've been given some water now and they've got food from the flour, so they should start to grow and produce gas. It will just take a little bit more time the cooler it is. So no direct heat, don't put it on top of a radiator or on top of your airing cupboard or anything like that. Just put it somewhere ambient temperature and leave it till tomorrow. So at the moment I'm going to work on feeding it once a day, so I'll come back to this later on tomorrow. It might be later tomorrow evening, and I'll do it again and show you what it looks like for my first day, my first 24 hours. But we'll go from there, and then I'll speak a little bit more about using them. But in the meantime, let me know if you've got any questions. Thank you ever so much for watching. Thanks ever so much if you are going to watch on the replay. Do let me know in the comments if you have come to watch the replay. And again, where you've come from, whether you like baking sourdough or if it's your first time or if you've got any questions, just let me know. And if you've not already liked the page, my Epsom Bakehouse page on Facebook, you can like the page and then you'll get notification of when the rest of this series is up, and you can see how this starter is progressing, and fingers crossed it will do something. And if you did like the video, do share it on your timeline. There should be a share button just below the video, and let other people know if you think they're interested in making their own starter and they'd like to know how to get on. But for now, I'll say bye, and hopefully I'll see you again soon, because I'll be doing some more videos about the starter. Thanks very much.